Hello, Satnam. Greetings, everybody. It is me, Shakti here, and behind me you can see my painting of my yoni, a yoni. Today I'm doing a little live stream with Kate Orson, who's going to be coming online with me shortly, about the power of your cervix and some of the risks associated with cervical screening, and in particular what is called the LEEP or the LETZ procedure. So really excited to be doing this. It just came up completely spontaneously as an opportunity, actually, because I had reposted a newspaper article which came out, I think it was last week, about a very high percentage. I think it was around about 33% of young women, it was reported, weren't going to have cervical smear tests because of, as it was reported, shame around their genitals, and basically because of shame around their genitals and body shame and that kind of thing. And it really distressed me to hear that. So I posted it in that context, and then Kate came onto the thread and just added a whole other perspective from her lived experience, and something that she's really passionate about, as to other reasons why a woman might not want to go and have a cervical smear in the traditional way, at least. So this is what we're going to be talking about, and it comes from Kate's experience, which I'll let her talk about herself. So I'm just going to see, good morning those of you who are watching, hello. I'm just going to see if I can bring Kate online. Right, I don't see you watching at the moment, so let's just see. Are you there? Right, she's not there at the moment. This happened last time when I was doing a live stream. Don't see you there. So I'm just writing her a little message to see if she's going to come online. As soon as I can see that she's watching, I'll bring her online. So yeah, for anyone who's watching, we're talking about cervical screening, the power of the cervix, the risks associated, and Kate, just going to see if she's there now. No. Okay. What was I going to say? With the LEEP, I don't like to frame things in a negative way, so I was trying to think of how to express this without putting fear into, and offering it as an empowering rather than a fear-making live stream. But you know, I guess still, even though I guess I do make assumptions that women know about these stuff, and there's stuff that I don't know about, so I'm learning all the time as well. But I think there's still a huge gap in self-understanding amongst women, as well as then in the medical establishment, in the mainstream, about the power and the importance of the yoni, the vagina, the clitoris, the cervix, all of these beautiful organs of the feminine. Okay, so I'm just going to see if we can bring Kate online now. Yes, here she is, and I'm going to bring Kate onto the... So she's just coming into the discussion now. Thank you, Kate. It takes a little while to set these things up, so thank you everyone for your patience. She's just coming online now. But as we're doing that, I'm just going to bring to your attention any woman who's watching this. Forgive my throat. There you are. Hi. Hi. I'll put this down. I was just going to show people, I don't know if you've seen this, the work of Laura Doe.
It's coming up backwards. I can't read it. But...
Oh yeah, of course. The Art and Science Female Arousal. Also, I can hear my voice. Do you have headphones you could use?
Yes. 1 sec.
Okay, no worries.
I'll just leave this here and then I'll come back. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. while Kate goes to get her headphones, I'm also going to show you another resource, which is Naomi Wolf's book, Vagina. I so highly recommend this book. It's just wonderful. And in this, she talks really clearly about the way in which the yoni connects with a woman's emotional, spiritual, psychological, every aspect of her being, her life, and how the way that we touch the yoni, the way that we touch the vagina, which of course includes the cervix, and interact with it will have a huge impact on a woman's life, her sexuality, her mental health, her emotional well-being. So I know, Kate, you're going to talk about that as well. So you've got your headphones in now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So really happy to be having this conversation, Kate. Thank you so much for being willing to come online and do this with me.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure.
Do you want to just introduce yourself and say why this is something, like who you are, first of all?
Yeah, so I'm Kate Orson, and I'm originally from the UK, living in Switzerland at the moment, and I'm a writer. And I just came to this topic because I had in the UK it's called the LEEP procedure. I had this procedure 13 years ago, and I had a lot of side effects, and I just sort of assumed there was something wrong with my body. And then because the doctor said it was like totally fine and normal and no big deal. And then like 13 years later, I suddenly uncovered like the truth about it, and that there's thousands of women around the world dealing with these problems after the procedure, and not all being told by their doctors that it's all in their heads and no big deal. So I just started writing articles about it, and I formed a support group for women. We've got nearly over 1,000 women in there that have been through this and are like looking for answers. And I'm just really interested. I've always been interested in tantra, and it's helped me what little I've studied of it. And I'm now working with Olivia Bryant on doing a self-cervix course, which is all about healing the cervix. And I'm just really interested in having this conversation and seeing how we can help women recover, because it's quite, some women, I'm not sure if they will ever completely recover, but we want to try and see what we can do. So yeah.
Right. Wow. I took a moment to read a couple of your blogs this morning just to get a bit of insight. But for anyone who's watching this, and I know you've probably told this story a lot in various ways, can you just kind of talk us through a little bit what your experience was? So you went for a regular cervical smear?
Yeah, so I'd had a few smears and they were abnormal. So then I went to have this procedure. It's called the LEETZ, and it's where it was described to me as burning off a few cells. And the doctor said, oh, it's a few cells and it's, it's no big deal. He didn't say anything about side effects. And afterwards, I just felt really unwell. Like I got an infection and I found it hard to sit up, and my whole body felt weak, and my stomach muscles were really weak. And then you have a certain healing period. They recommend 6 weeks where you shouldn't have sex. And then like afterwards, the first time I had sex, like it just felt like my whole body felt broken inside, like everything was tense, and I had all this pelvic pain. And the most shocking thing for me was like I had an orgasm, but I could just literally feel a muscle move, but there was like no pleasure. There was no like sensation, and it was just so scary. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't warned about this. They never said anything about sex. And so I just sort of assumed, oh, I must be a freak, because they said it's totally minor. So if I've had this big reaction, I must be like a sexual, like really screwed up or something. And I kind of hid it, and I didn't talk about it because I thought if I talk about it, then I'm going to put people off this procedure, and then they might get cancer and blah, blah, blah. And then I suddenly uncovered that it was happening to many thousands of women around the world. So yeah.
Ooh. I feel, gosh, so I feel such a heaviness and a sadness when I hear you talk
Yeah.
about that. It's like such a disregard and dishonoring of your body, and a lack of understanding of the feminine and the beautiful
Mm.
yoni and your own experience. I can totally empathize with that also, in a very different way. I've not had that procedure, but when I gave birth, my vagina tore, and
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was a thing that could happen actually. I was a
Mm-hmm.
bit ignorant,
Mm.
and it was really painful to have sex afterwards. And the level of grief that I felt because of that was like I didn't quite understand why I felt such grief that I couldn't experience pleasure anymore in the way that
Yeah.
I had done in lovemaking. It was huge. It felt like it affected my whole identity
Mm-hmm.
and well-being as a woman. So
Yeah.
in a different way,
Yeah.
I can relate and understand. But so
Yeah.
so you know, I kind of feel like crying in a way.
Mm.
It,
Yeah. It's very
yeah.
sad, like the collective. I Because when I started this and I started writing about it, I would just get these messages from women, and it was almost like I couldn't cry for myself, but I could cry for them. And every time I got these messages, I just felt so sad because it is devastating for people. And yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Just going to sit with that for a minute. That's okay. Yeah. Um, yeah. What had, yeah, I feel like we could sit there for a long time actually and just feel that.
Hmm.
Um, what had your sexual experience or your experience of your body and your sexuality been up to that point before, like beforehand?
Um, so I guess I was like the kind of person that I just felt like my sexuality was like the center of my being. I was quite, I guess I was, I look back and it's not like I feel like I don't regret anything or anything like that, but I felt very sexually alive, and it really was a lot about me. And I've always written, and sexuality was often something I was writing about. Like I was writing stories, and that it was often on this topic of sex. And the stories were fictional, but what I found interesting is that after the LETZ procedure, I couldn't write fiction anymore. Like I still write, but I can only write factual things. It somehow affected my creativity and my brain, and that was a huge loss. And so yeah, so it was like the, as you say, it was the loss of like my entire being, and I had to build it up from scratch, and it took many years to rebuild it.
And Kate, did you have a connection with your cervix before then? In like, were you aware of it? Did you understand it? Did you feel it? Did you sense it? Did
No.
you know about it?
No, not at all. I didn't have a clue. And I think I must have had like blended orgasms, because I just thought, oh, the clitoris is the only orgasmic thing. But then I lost a lot of my orgasmic sensation afterwards. So I think the cervix must have been involved somehow, but I didn't have a lot of body awareness, and I didn't have a lot of body consciousness. And and I never ever felt my cervix. I would never say, oh, that's my cervix. But weirdly, after the procedure, because my cervix was in pain and it was in tension, I literally feel my cervix all the time. Like I can always be like, oh yeah, there's my cervix. It's the tension, it's the pain, and it's not severe pain, but it's always there. And I've spoken to some people about nerve damage, and how like Olivia Bryant has told me about how when the nerves regrow, they can be tingling,
Right.
and that's just kind of thing. So my cervix is very much alive these days, even in a wounded state. So yeah, like
Mm,
now it's only since then. I had no idea the cervix was orgasmic before, and I only learnt that afterwards.
right. Yeah. So I guess through a very painful route, you were then, in your self-healing journey. I'm curious to know what you discovered and what supported you. So actually, before we go back, I just want to kind of share as well from your own lived experience, because you've kind of referred to a few things, but I think it's really important to spell it out, because I know there will probably be some naysayers, and or you actually encountered doctors telling you that you were imagining it, right? Or that there's no, you know, there are no nerve endings in the cervix is something that you were told.
Yeah.
So in terms of, like you say, you experience a direct loss of creativity, a sense of like a loss of identity, a loss of pleasure. You know, what other effects did you experience that were very apparent to you?
Well, there's kind of health issues involved. So uh, it's something to do with the nerves in the cervix. They go directly to the midbrain, and that part of the brain, I don't know much about it, but it's responsible for all bodily function. So, so it's almost like this procedure could cause any side effects in a way, because,
Right.
for example, chronic fatigue is one of the symptoms that can happen, and
Right.
it's all very. So I do. I have had chronic fatigue before and after the procedure, and yeah, it's hard to really. It's just so huge. It's so huge that it's hard to yeah, say like you get depression, and it's kind of like, I think that somehow the cervix is like something going, it's got all these nerves, and I know that scientists are now calling the stomach the second brain because it's got so many nerves in, and I think the cervix is sort of similar. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I think that when if you remove a part of it and you accident, like some women, when they remove a part of it, are absolutely fine or seem to be absolutely fine. But I think if you hit these nerves, then it can cause like almost like a brain injury, because it just really affects your thinking and creativity and sense of well-being and sense of identity. Because I think at heart we're all sexual beings, like even if we're not regularly having sex, like it's the center of ourselves. So if you take that away
Right.
from someone, it's like
Mm-hmm.
they're in a complete crisis because they've lost
Mm-hmm.
the center of themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
it can cause depression and like dissociation from the body and trauma symptoms. And I mean, I feel lucky in the sense that I didn't have it as bad as some people, but some people have PTSD and yeah, suicidal issues, and yeah, so
Right. So these
yeah,
are some of the things in your group that other women are reporting, just, you
yeah.
know, so just to kind of add kind of weight and, you know, more evidence to this in a way. What kind of things are other women saying in your group?
Well, yeah, it's huge. I mean, I don't really know where to start. There's a lot of emotional issues. Some people have even gone into psychosis as a result of this. It's affect people's. There's someone I can think of, like she had bipolar disorder, but she was able to manage it naturally with just like taking care of herself and not using medication. But this having the LETZ procedure like completely threw her off and just completely threw off her mental health, and she's struggling, but I think she's found ways to start dealing with it. Yeah, there's all kinds of things, like it can cause like the cervix. I think that when a doctor removes part of the cervix, they think it's all in isolation and it's not going to affect the rest of the body, but it can
Right.
affect the legs. There's women with leg issues, like their legs go numb or they've got pain in the legs, or yeah, it can affect the bladder, it can affect the bowels because they're so close to the cervix.
Okay.
Digestive issues.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite huge, and
Right.
yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't want to like share too many horror stories. Yeah, but just for people
But
to be
it's
aware.
it's good to know, and it's good to be real. And again, as
Yeah.
you're talking, I'm actually reminded. I haven't read it for a while, but in this book, Naomi Wolf,
Hmm.
I know there's a chapter where she talks about women and girls who were brutally sexually abused in war zones, I think, and the effect upon the emotional well-being and the psyche of those women was
Hmm.
traumatic. And also she also talks about well, it's kind of slightly separate, but I think it's connected, clitoridectomies as well. So the
Hmm.
sense of loss that there is, that I think really isn't understood. It's really
Yeah.
not understood in the world how the yoni and every part of that is just so central to a woman's sense of being on every level and every layer. So I mean, I'm so grateful to you for speaking out and for bringing this to my attention, because I wasn't aware of it. And again, I want to just come back again to something more practical for a minute for anybody who's watching this at the moment, because I've not had it and you have, and you know about it. So if you go for a cervical smear and you're told that there is some abnormal cells, the doctor will suggest having what's called a LEEP or a LEEP procedure, which is to remove surgically under local anesthetic some cells which are considered to be abnormal, right? This is what we're talking. Okay. Were you given any information at the time about side effects, risks, anything like this?
So I don't remember being given any information, and I think there's a tendency to just rush women through the procedure and get it done as quickly as possible. And they are like, I've spoken to somebody who said that the official guidelines are that women should be warned about an increased risk of premature birth. Like that's one of the official risks. But they're not being, some are being warned about that and some aren't, or like they'll do it in a really weird way. They'll be like, oh, how many children have you got, do you want any more? And then they won't mention it at all, because they'll assume, oh, this person told me right now they're probably not going to have any more children, so I won't bother explaining the risk. So it's all a bit dodgy. And with the sexual side effects and the wider emotional side effects, it's never been researched whether it happens or whether it doesn't happen. So they really don't have a clue, and if you complain afterwards, they'll say it's not related, it's nothing to do with it, the cervix has nothing to do with sex. That's the kind of thing that they'll say. So yeah, and I should say that this, because there are different options, if this happened to you. And one thing to note is it seems like it's around 15% of women that have these issues that I've got, and there's like different levels. There's different levels of harm. Like some people have it more seriously, some have it mildly, and some can recover. Like some people might have it at first and then it gets better, and it can always get better to some extent. It's just whether it can get completely better is unknown.
So what have you learned since about the cervix that you didn't know, that you'd like every woman to now know?
Well,
and see, your face is a bit half off the camera. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just away because this is the first time I've done it on my phone, and I wasn't prepared to so I'm holding my phone.
It's fine. What you're saying is amazing.
Yeah, so the thing to know about the cervix is that it's orgasmic. I really would like everyone in the world to know that it's orgasmic, that it has these amazing nerves in it that go directly to the brain. So it's and from what I've heard from the people that their cervixes are in better shape, you can have really amazing orgasms with the cervix. And it's a really important part of our bodies. It's really like it feels as if it's the center of our identity and our being. And so it's something to connect with, and to learn whatever way you decide to learn about how to connect with your cervix. Because I was speaking to this woman, and she was like, well, if the cervix was orgasmic, then wouldn't we all be like masturbating with our cervixes? And we're not doing that, so it can't be. And so I just feel like you should go and try that. And I know that I found this book. The first thing I found about, I don't know, 7 years ago, was this book that said the cervix was orgasmic. So I did try. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I did try it, and I was able to have a cervical orgasm despite having had this procedure and having harm. So I guess it must be pretty resilient as well for some women, not for everybody. So I would say go away and try it out, and see what happens. And it takes time as well, because it seemed like it was slow to wake up, like probably because I'd been ignoring it the whole time. But yeah.
Have you learned anything about the connection between the cervix and spirituality, or the way that it is sometimes perceived in a spiritual way, or as a gateway to greater opening, for example?
Yeah, I mean, not too much because I've kind of been focused on trying to heal and recover. Then I feel like I'm not in that sort of space yet where like I'm exploring that. But it certainly seems like, yeah, that it has a consciousness of its own, and I don't know. Yeah, there's something very powerful about it and very important. And I know I've read Vagina by Naomi Wolf, and I know she talks about how she feels that there's some kind of subconscious patriarchal force in our society that's trying to attack our vagina. And almost like it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I do stand by, like, it's very strange that that the medical system is wants to screen this part of the body and doesn't screen men's bodies, and is pretty obsessed with it. Like, it can't be coincidence that a part of our bodies that is so powerful is being targeted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also a really important point. That I just want to say, because after I shared that newspaper article, and as I kind of was saying before I brought you in, the bit that sort of I felt sad about and wanted to talk about was the body shame that it referred to amongst younger women, and why that was why they weren't having a cervical smear test.
Yeah.
And then actually, after you posted your thing, I just reflected for a minute on my last experience of having a cervical smear test, which was last year. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, like, yeah, it was because I changed doctors, and it was in a new environment with a new nurse I didn't know, and it was really horrible. And I walked out of that place thinking, I'm never going to do that again. The room was clinical, cold. I was squeezed up against the wall. It was so undignified.
Yeah.
The nurse was completely detached and unempathetic. It's never been a procedure I found painful personally, but the way that it was conducted, I thought, my God, that is just the most undignified, horrible experience for me of my most sacred parts, and I'm never going to submit myself to it in that way again. I will only ever do it again if it's in a way that honors me as a woman and honors what I need, which is a safe space, a warm space, a loving space, a caring space, tenderness, connection, heart, energy. And otherwise I'm not going to do it. So actually it brought that up for me as well, which is, why am I submitting myself to be examined in this very clinical manner that encourages me to detach completely from the most sacred part of my body?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think what you're experiencing on a more conscious level, I think women may be experiencing unconsciously, and that's why they decide, I don't want to go for a smear, and they don't really know why. And in the surveys it comes out as embarrassment, but it might be that there's more to it like that. And I mean, I think with smears it's it's a personal choice, and I don't want people to listen to this conversation and then think, oh, I'm not going to have a smear, or I think it's a personal choice. I personally chose not to have smears because it was just too traumatic for me, and it was like a really gut reaction. I was just like, I'm just not going back. I know that what happened to me was preventative medicine. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with my body, and I know that my body was a lot worse off afterwards. But with these things, there's always a risk. Like, there's a risk that these abnormal cells could turn into cancer. So I think it's just like, if anyone listens to this and gets afraid, they should probably go and research as much as possible and make a decision for themselves. And there's a really good book about cervical screening, and it's written by a Glasgow GP. She's like just a everyday NHS GP, but she doesn't go for smears herself. And she called the book it's The Patient Paradox by Margaret McCartney. And that's a really good book that looks at all screening and looks at the pros and cons, so that you can make an intelligent decision. Because when I first decided not to go for smears, I didn't even decide. I was just like, I just didn't go back. But after I
Yeah.
read her stuff, I realized that this can be an intelligent decision, and there's lots of women that are making it. But it's also
Right.
about you. Like, you definitely don't want to ignore any symptoms. You want to get everything checked out, and you want to make sure you've researched everything, because there is a risk. And there are some people that have left abnormal cells for a long time, and they have developed into cancer over time, or they just had cancer anyway. I mean, but something happens. So it's always good to like not bury your head in the sand. I know I myself am the kind of person that because of the trauma, I will bury my head in the sand and just like not take action. But if it's possible not to do that and to make a really conscious decision about what you decide to do, then that's also good. And I also know people that have gone to smears and had abnormal cells diagnosed, and then they like really turn around their lifestyle, you know, like they give up smoking and drinking and sugar, and that is a really positive thing that they might not have done if they didn't go for a smear. So I don't think there's any right answer about what to do.
Thank you. What you mentioned, the book, The Patient Paradox, and I'll post a link to that underneath this thread.
Yeah.
What else has been really helpful for you in your healing?
Well, the number one thing would be it's an online course on healing the cervix called Self Cervix. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah,
I have
like
heard, yeah,
yeah,
I haven't done
from
it, but I have.
Olivia Bryant, and that was really amazing. And I had tried different things for like ever since it happened, like for like the last 13 years, and I found her course I think 2 years ago, and that was like it was like night and day compared to what I tried before. Like it was just so much more powerful, and she's just got so much understanding about the cervix and all the science behind it, and the practice of doing it. So that's been really transformative for me, and I'm now working with her to make a course specifically for anyone that has like injured cervix from procedure like LETZ. So that's the number one thing that I think is been really helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you feel to mention that you, or is that's it? Just because I know
Um,
that there are people watching this who like really want to know, especially anyone who's in the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything else on the top of my head, but
Okay.
there's lots of resources, and there's all kinds of groups on Facebook for people talking about what to do about abnormalities. So you can just go and look and see what feels right for you. And I know some people that have had this procedure, and they've already been involved in some kind of, you know, tantra or conscious sexuality, and they've had the procedure and they haven't noticed problems, and they've been able to heal it, and it's all been fine. So this is my experience, and other people might have another experience. So it's just really important to get informed and make the choice that's right for you.
And of course, there's your support group.
Yeah, which is called Healing from LEEP stroke LETZ, and you'll find that on Facebook. Maybe we can put it on the comments or something, or
Yeah, we'll put it in the
yeah.
comments underneath. Um, okay, so, and then final question, I guess, what do you now, having gone through this experience, what do you feel needs to happen? Are you campaigning for changes? Like which way round what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, so I'm sort of like raising awareness with other women, so that they can be informed and that they can get help afterwards if they've already had it. And I am trying to campaign for change. I know there's like I'm in touch with a few researchers who are researching different ways to heal the abnormal cells. Like one man, he did some in Africa. They couldn't afford the machines to do the LETZ procedure, so they used HIV antivirals on the cervix, and then it cleared up the HPV, and all the abnormal cells cleared up. So he's like using HIV antivirals. So I guess I'm campaigning for change and for it to be acknowledged as a side effect. That's the major thing, is like that women just know, so they can make a choice, because now they don't have any choice unless they found me or my articles before the procedure. Then they just go into it thinking it's all completely fine, and then they're like the trauma of being so violated that something's happened to you and you weren't told it was a risk is really awful. Um, so So yeah, like eventually I'd like it to be listed as a risk, but there's not enough research going on to list it as a risk. There was a survey done. Me and Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust, we worked on a survey together to ask women about their long-term side effects, and through that, at some point, then hopefully there'll be some research in the future so that women know that it happens and are informed. But that's a long way down the line. So yeah.
Right. And what about the sort of the medical establishment or the way that smears happen? You know, like, is there, I mean, it sounds like there's definitely scope for some re-education to happen big time amongst
Yeah.
the GPs, or even the way this is handled
Hmm.
in the National Health Service.
Oh, so what's your question?
Well, is that something that you would put your energy into, kind of re-education in the health service, or is it more about re-educating women? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to, but it's really hard to like to get into it because they're just so like, no, that everything's fine. We're not going to change. We're not going to talk to you. So I am
Right.
trying, yeah, like
Right.
yeah, I'm sort of like yeah, trying different things, and yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll see what
Okay.
happens. I
Just
just
that's
sort of,
interesting to hear that
yeah.
again. It's like when I had the sort of painful sex thing after childbirth, when I went to my gynecologist, who was a woman, her
Hmm.
answer was to give me antidepressants and
Oh.
say use it or lose it.
Oh God, yeah, that's
That was it.
awful. I think
Use it or
yeah,
lose it. Mm.
yeah. So I think things are gradually improving. Um I was on this webinar last night actually with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in the UK, and
Oh,
they had some pelvic physiotherapists on, and they were talking about painful sex, and they were talking about orgasm, and you know, and that pelvic physiotherapy can help. So I think things are changing. It's just really slowly, like it's improving. Yeah, because
mm,
I mean, there are still, but having said that, there are still some awful doctors out there that are going to say stuff like that to women, and it is really awful the type of things that people are told. Like,
mm,
yeah,
mm.
they just don't seem to
So if
understand.
I if I went and had a smear, or I've just had one, and I get a letter saying you've got some abnormal cells, right?
Hmm.
What would you recommend to that woman?
Um, I just feel like I can't recommend anything because I'm not a medical professional. But the number one thing so I would just recommend that you do your own research and decide if the procedure, if you want to go ahead with the procedure or not. Um, and I'm really glad that some women have decided, they've made a choice for themselves, and they've learned what I've written on the internet, and they've still made their own choices. Um,
Right.
and
Mm.
oh, what was I going to say? If you're in the UK, one of the things that you can do is that in the UK they do this thing called see and treat, which is actually where they so after you have if you've been diagnosed with abnormal cells at the smear test, you go for this thing called a colposcopy, where they use a microscope to look at your cervix to see what state it's in, and they take a biopsy, which is they take a small amount of cells to look at under the microscope to see the level of abnormality. But what happens in the
Yeah.
UK sometimes is they skip that step. So at the colposcopy appointment, they'll be like, oh, I can just do the treatment now if you want. And that's called see and treat. So they're skipping they're skipping the really in-depth diagnosis because they're like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just a woman's cervix. We'll just do the treatment. And the doctors actually
Okay.
get paid a bonus. They get paid a bonus if they do it all in one go because
Oh,
they've reduced appointment times.
right.
So it's really important, and I just find that really sickening that there's literally a bonus on our body. That's how little it's valued, like so
Yeah.
and understood. And so
Right.
if you just make sure that you are like, no, I don't want to be treated. I want to get the biopsy, and I want to actually, you know the level of abnormality, because there is a lot of cases of false diagnosis and women that there's levels of abnormality, and the CIN3 is the one that they recommend to have the LETZ, and CIN1 they often see that it just recovers naturally. So so yeah, like they could say, oh, it looks like CIN3, and they never test it, so they don't know it's CIN1. And then you've gone through all the, if you ended up like someone like me, you would have all these side effects for nothing. And there are women that have these side effects and much worse just for no reason, because it was a false diagnosis. So just make sure that you get a full picture of what's going on before you decide about the treatment, and don't be rushed into anything. Yeah.
Thank you. Really important message about self-awareness, self-empowerment, getting yourself informed, and yeah, I also really honor and, you know, sort of bow to your not preaching one particular way and just being sort of the way shower for women to make their own healthy, informed choices. Really admire you for speaking so openly about your own journey and your story, and I just think that must be so valuable for so many women. So again, just bowing to you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And anybody who's been watching this, I haven't been looking at the comments because I like to just focus on the conversation that we're having, but we'll post those resources in the comments below, and make sure people know how to reach you, Kate, and Olivia, and the book, and anything else. So all those resources will be made available.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Thank you, my darling. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to, hear about this.
Really glad. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Much love. See you, Kate.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.